Welcome to this video, which is talking about the Clark pads. Very kindly was sent a pair, so go and check them out. I've been doing some riding with them. It's taken some time to actually find the space and time to give them a solid review, and I've written some notes down here whilst I was riding, trying to see whether or not adding pads. So I've always ridden naked, not my clothes, but the wheel. The wheel has always had whatever came in the box with it, and very often I wouldn't even fit those. I'd just ride it as it was for years. So since these things came out, I've been riding. This was a bit of a sea change for me to actually give them a go, get comfortable with them, get in the right position, etc. So a nice learning curve, hence the reason I've given it some time and some miles under my belt to have a reflection on how it actually reacts. I spent the time riding with these on, just listening for feedback on these pads fitted, to think how they're in the little nuances of riding, how it felt, how it reacted, how it changed my riding style. Did I have to adapt to the pads? Did they work around me, or did I have to change my riding style, etc.? So I've got a few points on this. And from the off, I'm not going to hold it in suspense. Having cheap pads or Clark pads or super boost pads, whatever you want to call them, is definitely massively more an advantage than it is a disadvantage. So I sort of really quickly got into the effort of actually bending your knees whilst riding more than I would have usually done. And what that does is it takes the strain essentially off your knees. So if your knees are locked out and you're leaning into these pads, you're actually trying to, where your shin is, you're trying to force that knee joint kind of the wrong way. And you can do that for short bursts of time if you're on smooth road. I found with off-road, if you put your full weight on, like a Michael Jackson lean forward, it works fine, but there's more strain on your knee. And the point is, there's no real requirement to do that, because now you've got your shin to push into these pads. You don't need to lean violently forward to get the thing to move. Just making sure your shins are making contact with the pads actually provide that huge amount of torque that you could never harvest before. So fitting these pads reduces the strain, essentially. It reduces your load, and actually you get less fatigue from having the pads on. So whilst you're riding, I've found, rather than being on your tippy toes on the foot plates, trying to get the thing to move and go, actually, a lot of the time I was flat-footed, and as I say, harvesting loads more torque. The acceleration, you could reach the acceleration point, it would take you quite a long time to reach without these fitted. So from just that alone, the acceleration is the shining part of this, of putting these pads on. It's just incredible to be able to lean your shins into something, have that much control over the unit, to be able to push it forward and accelerate much quicker than stock. Now, I fitted these to the Monster Pro, which is a 24-inch wheel, currently the biggest one on the market. This is a wheel that really these pads are required if you want to get as much out of that wheel as you possibly can. If you want to reach what that wheel's capable of, you need to fit these side pads. Unless you've got no interest in accelerating hard and braking hard, that's not really a problem. So if you're a very slow rider, you're just going to take it incredibly steady, you don't need them to ride this wheel, the Monster Pro. What it does do, if you want to access what this wheel can actually do, its hidden potential, is you fit these Clark pads on and it's all available to you suddenly. It's like the old computer games where you type in a little multi-code and suddenly it opens up this whole new world. It's like that. So it really brings that wheel to life. Now, the smaller diameter you go down, the more accessible that torque is with your body weight, so with your leverage. Anyhow. Now, people are fitting them to 18-inch wheels. Absolutely fine. That's fine. And you can still, the same applies. You can still gather more of that potential from the wheel than you ever would be able to otherwise. But if it's on an M10-3, little 10-inch wheel, don't bother with them. That's, no point. With the only caveat being, if you really wanted to jump the thing, having some form of block attached to the side of the unit and tuck your foot under it, enables you to do huge jumps, but wouldn't necessarily recommend it on the M10-3. So that moves me on to the jumping side of it. Not only the jumping side though, so if you've got no interest in jumping at all and you're watching this thing, well, I've got no interest in jumping, but I'd like to access that torque. These are also useful. I've found if you're going along and you hit a bump and the wheel lifts off, typically what would happen is it lifts off without pads, is you might get a little bit of wobble on, especially if you weren't ready for it and you weren't actually intentionally trying to jump the wheel. You hit something, you start to lift off, you might get a little bit of wobble on. With these, I've found that almost eradicated it entirely. So I found it eradicated the wobble as I lifted off the ground. It kept it real planted because it was wrapped around my shins as I was leaning forward, giving 2 more points of contact rather than just your feet, your left and right foot on it. And typically you might actually be on tiptoes, like I talked about earlier. Not on tiptoes, flat-footed, left and right leg on the shin. That amount of contact point kept it stable as it lifted off. Not only that, when you landed back down again, incredibly stable. I was landing down pretty much dead straight. The wheel was getting no wobble on. And if I wanted to accelerate there on out, there was no wobble either. It just pushed on with immediate acceleration. So it works both ways. If you really wanted to jump, you could have put them on lower. So my feet were tucked right underneath them. Downside is, on a lot of models, you can't then fold up the foot plates. That's a disadvantage. But if you put them down low, you can tuck your feet underneath. And other models do allow you to fold up the foot plates. So being able to tuck your feet underneath enables you to lift the wheel up, and they're stuck on so solid because of the surface area, because they're so big, that they're not coming off. So you can jump if you want to jump. If you hit a pothole unexpectedly or expectedly, it's going to decrease the wobble because of the contact points. And that then brings me on to another thing. It's related to the reason why you wobble. Your foot is here, the mass of the wheel is up here. It gets a tank slapper on, like on a motorbike kind of thing, starts shifting about. You've got to then bring that under control. And usually the only way you can do that is tilt your knees inwards, grab that wheel and tighten it down. Either brake hard or accelerate hard to try and minimize that wobble, bring it under control, then continue on. What I found is with these pads, because they stick out, it's a very similar effect to having a handlebar, a steering bar on the unit. So when you want to take control of it, you've got these the front pads that are sticking out like that and your shins go into, you've actually got a huge amount of control because they're sticking out. So it's almost like that. And you've got it, but with your shins. So you're controlling the left and right now, not just with your feet and your ankles trying to twist in your body movement, maybe a bit of body lean. You've actually got your shins as well. So the whole power pretty much of your legs you can use to manipulate the wheel. So you want to turn a sharp left, for example, you dig in with that right leg, push it in to the front right pad. So you push in and turn, and it turns so much sharper, so much more crisp, and so much more under control with the pads fitted than anything I've ever experienced before riding naked. And so you do actually get extra control out of that. So I've got the jumping on here, got much better acceleration, stroke torque. You can garnish that torque from the wheel that you wouldn't ever get before. There's a slight change in the way that you actually ride, which is if you're constantly leaning into those pads going along a trail, when you hit little undulations in the ground, that kicks back through those pads into your shin, and it's a completely different riding experience. So whereas when you ride naked, all that movement is on your ankle joint. So your ankle joint's here, it can play around with that movement. As soon as you brace yourself in, this movement is starting to impact, as you can see, straight into your shin area here. So imagine this is the front of your leg. Before, it was loose and supple with your ankle joint. Now you're actually clamping yourself in. So you hit a bump, that impacts up into the pad here, straight into your shin. So it's partly conditioning on your shin to take that sudden whack, which will come pretty quickly. But also it can be fairly uncomfortable. But in turn, I found with that contact point on your shin, you can actually push your foot back slightly more and be in the middle of the front and rear pad. So you're playing around in that area. That then impacts it less. But on the big jumps or bumps, when you hit something, I was finding before the shock was traveling from the bottom of my foot all the way up through into the lower of my back. Having back problems, this is not ideal. What I was finding was hitting the shin was absorbing something. It felt like, and this is obviously not scientific, but it felt like about 50% of the shock was being absorbed in the lower part of the leg, which is flipping strong, of course, into that pad. Now the pads are fairly soft, so it was taking that impact, and I was hardly feeling anything on the lower spine. So that's pretty amazing. That transfer of that shock going up through your body wasn't reaching my lower back. And I've been riding this wheel now for quite some time, and that was a totally different experience. So when I'm really reflecting on, I went out, did a 15 miler just a minute ago with these on, I was really concentrating on the ride and how it changed. And that was one of the things that I'd written down. I keep stopping and writing these things down. But very noticeable the way that was happening. So the only bad thing I could say is if you're lent into those pads, you hit something and it's naturally going to push you forward, you're actually going to accelerate. So you're always primed to accelerate. That's the disadvantage to some degree. So yes, but you do end up, when you hit those bumps, yes, you're primed to accelerate, but you're also got much more control over the wheel because you're clamped into these pads, and that steering, as I say, you can force this thing. Now, you can actually force the issue, basically. If you want to quickly move one way or the other, you've got this steering bar effect going on. So that was pretty neat. Braking style, now I found that with this, I had to adjust the rear pads to get them more comfortable for my legs. I also pulled the gap out, the spacing out, so the front is right where I can lean into the shin. But the rear one, if you're braking, you can actually pull that quite far back from your legs so it doesn't interfere with your normal riding. And when you want to brake, you lean back like you usually do, a long way if you're riding naked. You lean right back, but you hit the stops that are there. The only thing I would have said I could do with them being almost as curved as the front. So it's a nice thing to sit your calf muscles into as you lean back to give you extra leverage and more purchase, I would have said, as I went back. But they're there nonetheless. The thing that does change, just like with the acceleration, with the cheat pads on, with the Clark pads on, is that I bend my knees. And so I found with braking, it was nowhere near as effective just by leaning back with knees locked, but having to crouch right down into a sitting position and lean right down and back over, get your ass right over the back of the wheel. And I kept testing this over and over again. The most effective way was to lean into those pads at the rear and get my ass right down low. And you can almost get the wheel to skid on this gravel. That's how much torque you could get. If you try and do it traditional way, I was finding the braking time was a lot longer. Hanging my ass right over the back and sitting down low, got the braking back under control again. And that was the other thing. The wobble there as well was massively reduced. So if you pin it with no pads on, slam your weight right back, you tend to get a bit of a twitch going on underneath. With the pads, that steering effect's able to grab it, control it, no issues whatsoever. And so I'm hoping that's given you an insight into the Clark pads and how some of the advantages could come forth for you. I say, if you're not trying to go fast and you've got no real interest in quick movements or jumping or anything like that, you needn't bother. I find that in my mind, maybe it's just in my mind, but you seem to be more trapped onto the wheel as if you're more locked into it. I very rarely crash, but thinking about trying to get away from it, step out of it, usually, of course, you're free. You can just step forward. Now you need to take your legs out slightly and back. So there's another extra little process in there, and it kind of feels like you're more encompassed in the wheel, which at times is an advantage, especially if you think. For instance, one of the places an advantage, if you're going down a steep hill and you're off-road and it's got loads of bumps on the way down, what typically happens is your feet jump forward. It's finding with these fitted, there's not that, it can't jump forward because your shin's touching this pad. And so it can't actually jump you forward. So I had more control. At the same time, I was being forced to accelerate to a degree. But I was definitely in more control than not having them. So it's not really swings and roundabouts. There's massively more advantages to having them than not having them. So I would definitely recommend them. If you feel like you don't even need to go near them, that's fine. But if you're on the verge of fitting some, then definitely try them out if you've got the budget to do it. And if you've already fitted them, let me know in the comments how you find them. What do you think of them? What pads have you got? Which models did you go for? What wheel have you got? And the environment you're riding. And let me know in the comments. I'm really interested to hear how you guys have got on fitting cheat pads, boost pads, super boost pads, Clark pads to the side of your wheel. Maybe they're homemade. If they're homemade, can you post them up on electricpeople.org? A photo of what you've made and just link it up in the YouTube comment. That would be brilliant. I'm really genuinely interested to see how you guys have got on with them. I'm going to keep them fit to the Monster Pro because being able to grab that torque, which is so difficult to get hold of when you're riding without them, massive bonus, just a massive bonus. Much more pleasure to ride. Riding flat-footed for longer leads to less fatigue rather than being on your tiptoes trying to get the stupid thing to actually accelerate. So all round, definite thumbs up. Give them a go. Try it. Check out the Clark's Pads website, which is clarkpads.com. So go and have a little look there. Contact the guys there. Let them know Speedy Feet sent you if you are. We don't get any kickback or anything like that. He literally just sent us one day, said, would you like to try them out? I said, yes, please. Might as well. Give it a go. And so we fitted the Monster Pro. It's actually long overdue, this video. He sent it months ago. So thanks very much for that. But it's clarkpads.com. If you want to go and have a look at them, just go and have a look at what they look like new. So nice and soft. Could be softer, but I think it sits there quite nicely. I would like the rear pads, the ones you've seen with me, to be similar to the front, so I can grab that extra power for braking. But yeah, thumbs up. Give this video a like. That would be really good. And share it if you find it useful. And let me know below, did you find this insightful and useful? Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.